Kia ora. This Sunday is the Christian festival of Pentecost, 50 days after the resurrection festival of Easter. And it owes its existence, that is Pentecost, entirely to the work of the author of Luke Acts, a 2-volume work. This author, drawing on imagery from the Hebrew scriptures, created this 50-day liturgical gap between the personal transformation, as in the appearance stories of the risen Christ, and the community transformation, as in the Acts 2 account that we heard this morning. This author penned this in the first quarter of the 2nd century, so 80 plus years after Jesus' death. In contrast, the fourth gospel, our second reading today, with its reference to the risen Christ breathing, hope he cleaned his teeth, on the gathered and saying, "Receive the Holy Spirit," merges those personal and community experiences of empowerment and transformation. And this author also penned this some 80 plus years after Jesus' death. Neither of these accounts are historical, which plainly speaking means they didn't literally happen. There was never 120 people gathered in Jerusalem at Pentecost who experienced a rushing wind, a tongue of fire over their heads, and the ability to speak in languages they had never learnt. Rather, this is a story spun by the community that Luke was a part of to encapsulate 3 important truths. Firstly, the importance of igniting a spark in the heart. Fire is a great metaphor for energy and empowerment that brings warmth and light to those around. Here in this passage, it is a community metaphor. The community is set alight, empowered to be warmth and light to the society they are among. Secondly, and following on from the first, is the importance of the languages of the many and the different. The spark in the heart wasn't for one's personal sanctification or what might call today personal growth or betterment. And it wasn't just for the community of believers either, warming and giving light to this new Jesus club. Rather, it was for the purpose of engagement with the many and the different, with foreigners, with those other than one's own class, race, or gender, whether they became part of a Jesus group or not. Lastly, this story underlines the power and potency of gathering together. Read Acts 1. They gathered together, waited together, which means they ate and slept together. They sorted through a contentious leadership issue together. And then they opened themselves as a community to discern the future together. And when this wind, fire, and languages came, it wasn't just the experience of the leaders, or Peter, who by the 2nd century was being touted as the paramount leader, but it was the experience of all the gathered, all 120. All of them were seized and transformed by this vision to take their individual sparks, make a communal fire, and share that warmth, light, and transformational energy with everyone in their society and world. Back some 80 years earlier, following the execution of Jesus, the disciples were shattered and scattered. There was no quick 3-day solution, or even, I suspect, a 3-year solution. The remembering, bringing the fractured and fragmented together again, finding forgiveness, solace, purpose, energy and hope took quite a while. And stories, what we now call the resurrection appearance stories, were crafted later to express some of that remembering. Our best source for the early years is the authentic Pauline letters like Galatians and 1st and 2nd Corinthians, written within some 20 years of Jesus' death. And not surprisingly, these letters show that the beginning of the post-Easter Jesus movement, like most beginnings, was messy. There were different folks doing different stuff. Some planned, some not, some successful, some failures. There was conflict. There was agreement. These Jesus groups in modern-day Turkey and Greece were small. The scholar Hal Telsig thinks about 16 people tops, gathering in a rented room or a rich widow's house, for a meal and talk and toasts and discussion and hanging out. And such gatherings were lifesavers. They gave space and time to breathe away from the fumes of hardship, violence and poverty that marked the lives of so many in the empire. Here in the kitchen, in the dining, dreams of an alternate empire were made. In the beginning was the meal. Or maybe in another place, maybe one such place being the rural, tempestuous Galilee, in the beginning was the fishing. Out early in the boats, dragging in the nets, telling tales and pulling big ones. Which is to say, in the beginning was working together, talking while working, dreaming and scheming. Maybe, kind of, possibly. But threaded into whatever gathering, whether that gathering was around food or work, was the fanning of desire. For desire drives vision. Desire drives change. Our parish church began here in Remuera in 1875. But before the beginning there was talking and food and the driver of desire and the start of a vision based on what our founders knew and hoped for. Visions are always constructed from what people know and have experienced already, seen others do, but are then blended with the hope about how things might be different. So, for example, churches had to be built with seats and a sturdy up-front communion table and pulpit. No one had probably seen a church without seats, table or pulpit. And the seats, table and pulpit had to be solid, built to last, hard to move, like Presbyterian theology. So they weren't moved to the sides after worship so that tables and food could be laid out. No, that was in a separate building, a hall, that would be constructed for that. And you didn't have youth activities and games in the church. There needed to be a separate building constructed for that. The priority was Sunday worship, and it got a building all to itself. This is what I suspect our forebears were told God wanted, the church wanted, and therefore they wanted. A place locally to gather for worship. But our forebears didn't just want to worship. They had a desire to be together, to learn, to help, and to support the young. So over time, halls expanded, a gymnasium was built, a lounge, supper room. We had tennis courts here, we had bowls and badminton. We had youth activities plus. Can't forget the hockey either. We funded and supported all sorts of charitable enterprises. We believed in making a society that was good, and good not just for us, but good for all. And we gave our time and money and passion to that end. In 1984, the first redevelopment of the halls was completed. The desire and vision was to reorientate ourselves to serve the community roundabout by providing meeting places and programs of general interest rather than just religious interest, and to find the funding to have a community director to facilitate that. Then in 1998, a second redevelopment happened with at least two important differences. First, there was a partnering organisation, a counselling service, that planned to be a long-term tenant. This led to the building of 3 dedicated counselling rooms and 2 offices that are now also counselling rooms. Think for a moment about how many churches you know that have dedicated counselling rooms available to counsellors in the public. The answer, I suspect, not many. Then think of what I call the jump, the vision jump, to build something different from what other churches were building or have built since. The second important structural change was not only of the chopping up of pews and refashioning the worship space in St Luke's, which I guess might have generated the most heated discussion of the whole development, but the physical connection of the worship space with the community space. The secular and the spiritual, though long connected in the thinking and vision of St Lucans, were being now deliberately, physically connected. The building design was reflecting the theology and vision of the parish. I'd like to suggest to you this morning, this Pentecost morning, that we are now at another such time in our history, where we need to pause, to gather, to rekindle our desire to make a difference. Relook, not just at what we're doing, but what our buildings need to be in order to support such a vision. At the heart of our vision are 4 strands. Firstly, progressive theology. This guides our liturgy and preaching, but also how we see ourselves in the world. It forms our values that include justice, compassion, hospitality, and service to others. It also tells us we're on a journey with a lot to learn. Secondly, converging into the first is our commitment to social service. In the language I grew up with, helping others, particularly those less fortunate than ourselves. So we provide meeting spaces, counselling rooms, food and drink, and welcome groups like the Anchorage Daycare Dementia Group. Thirdly, after progressive Christianity and social service, is our commitment to community engagement, to education for young, like the kindergarten, and old, to music of many varieties for the enrichment of many tastes, to being a place where anyone can wander in to rest, to read, to play chess, to make art. And lastly, in this convergence of strands is our commitment to transformational and structural change in our society, sometimes expressed through supporting groups like Restorative Justice and Pillars, who work with individuals and their families, and sometimes expressed through supporting advocacy groups like Te Oho Whakawhanongatanga, Christian Action Aotearoa, and Child Poverty Action Committee. These commitments, progressive Christianity, social service, community engagement, transformational structural change, They weave together and they give voice to a spiritual, theological and political commitment to believe in, envision and work for equity and well-being across Aotearoa. So this is what, at this time in history, a commitment to St Luke's looks like. In the past, worship was the main thing we did. That's no longer the case. And it's unlikely that it will ever be the case again. The spark in the heart is better called spirituality, and it permeates all we do, not just Sunday morning. Speaking the language and following the conventions around church life, what churches usually do, is no longer the main thing we do here. Our communication strategy is far broader than that, and is shaped by groups who use our centre and whom we support, and is shaped by our presence on the internet, like this recording. Gathering for church-initiated events is no longer the main thing that happens at 130 Remuera Road. We live in the St Luke's multiverse, with multifarious groups and people flowing through this place. So the question is, at this juncture in our history, how can our buildings be updated, remodeled, removed, or improved to support such a vision? All our buildings. And to find the answer to that question, we need, like the 120 gathered at Pentecost, the engagement of everyone present, rather than just our leaders. We need the wisdom of the past, but also the wisdom of trying things new. We need the capacity to be prudent and the courage to jump. Blessings to you this day.